Welcome to the Solid Verbal. And now, Dan and Ty.
Dan, I am not going to lie to you. I am elated.
Yeah.
To be doing this show with you today.
I love that.
I am thrilled about this episode.
I like that it's tickling you right where you need to be tickled, scratching you where you're itching. Bringing on Scott Dochterman, as you know, you've seen the title from The Athletic, to talk about the Big Ten TV draft, maybe a little Big Ten playoff stuff as the SEC is positioning itself with how it views the playoff and the ideas it's looking for to be more solution-oriented, and the Big Ten with Tony Petitti allegedly preferring, or at least pitching, the auto bid pitch for the 4+4+2+2. So right now we're at 12?
4-4-2-2-1-3.
1-3. There's it. That's how we.
You got to memorize it, then you can get it first.
I know.
First shot.
I know. Hey, real quick, it'd be great if you could consider subscribing to the YouTube channel down below. It really helps us out.
Scott's been doing great work over at The Athletic. He has written 2 articles now, over the last couple weeks that have really drawn our interest. The first, go out and read it. We'll link it up in the description here. Inside the Big Ten's TV draft, how Fox, NBC, and CBS split up the 2025 football schedule. So look, we come at it from this perspective. We've been talking about the TV side of this for generations now, or what feels like generations.
College football is a TV show.
College football's a TV show. Love it, hate it, despise it, whatever. The fact that they have a draft to pick which games are being which games are being played when and on which network is fascinating. Full stop. Don't care what you think of TV. The fact that they are drafting these games is of interest to anybody who grew up in the fantasy football era.
Yes.
I am excited to talk to Scott about this and find out what he's learned. Lord knows on this show, we've been drafted all sorts of weird things for as far back as we can remember. So an actual game draft is definitely of importance. We're going to focus a good chunk, most of our questions, on that structure, about it and how it came to fruition, all that type of stuff. So we'll get into that with Scott here momentarily. He also, at time of recording, we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, late morning. He published an article today. Why does the Big Ten want 4 automatic college football playoff bids? The league's case has a long history. So we're going to talk about that as well, because of course, that's very much in the news now as well. We've got this public posturing, at least on the SEC side. We haven't heard a whole lot from the Big Ten as of late, but we're going to get Scott's intel on that front as well. So cover those 2 things. At some point, we'll have to bring him back to talk specifically about Iowa football. Yeah. But today we're going to focus in a little bit more on these bigger picture, more national Big Ten related stories.
We're going to have to counteract this show that is so focused on, corporate interests and the business of college football broadcasting behind the scenes. And next week, we're going to have to do a show that's just like how to play left guard with Quentin Nelson, right? We just need to bring balance into the Solid Verbal ecosystem, whatever, and not go too far in any one direction. Obviously, we're going to do our previews coming up here this summer and, get into the more fun element of all of this. This is very much an early June show that we're super excited to do. But yeah, I'm going to need to hear about hand placement from Steve Hutchinson, right? We're going to need to do something to balance this out.
Go on out to verballers.com if you want to further support what Dan and I do. You get bonus episodes, ad-free episodes, Discord access to our wonderful community.
Oh, yeah.
Of Verballers. Again, that's verballers.com. If nothing more, if you like the show, hit follow, hit subscribe. If you can, leave a star rating or a review. All of that stuff helps, Dan. Should we dive right in?
Let's. And with that, it's our pleasure to bring on the Athletic Scott Dochterman, who has written a couple of fascinating pieces, the first of which is what truly inspired us to bring him on. But then I saw a new piece came out today on Tuesday, June 3rd, as we record this, about, Jim Delaney's strategy and the thought of Big Ten pitching auto bids and what that may have meant in previous years for the college football playoff and what it may not have meant. We had Scott on last year in talking about the, I don't know, is calamity a good word, Ty? I
think so. I mean, we tried to unpack what was going on with Iowa's offense.
Yes.
And at that point in time, our thinking was, We need to unpack this. We need an Iowa expert
Sure.
to help us understand not just what took place this offseason or back then in the 2023 season, but just give us the full evolution of how we got to this point.
Yes. So with that preamble, Scott, welcome back to the Solid Verbal.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, and at least I won't have to talk about the drive for 325 anymore. And
That's true.
I think it's over, so I think they'll be a little bit better this year. So, yeah, I'm glad to talk about other stuff.
Sidebar: Fresno State might have like the best tight ends coach randomly in the country, who just shouldn't be an offensive coordinator, and Brian Ferentz.
I tell you what, Brian was, Rob Gronkowski, and I talked to him about this, said Brian Ferentz was the best coach he ever had as a tight ends coach with the Patriots, taught him how to block, basically described to him, look, it's like pushing a car. That's how we attack the defenders. And he learned how to do it and turn them into a, Hall of Fame blocker as well as receivers. So Brian is really good in that area. It's a Peter principle. I mean, he's a great offensive line coach. He was a very good tight ends coach. I'm sure Fresno State will have some great coaches there. Everybody who played under him at that position swears by him. Sam Laporta, all of the above. And it's just calling plays and designing plays was probably just not his forte.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's start here. You wrote a piece on the Big Ten's TV network draft. Obviously, there are certain priorities that networks have in terms of, getting the first 1, 2, 3, 4 picks or whatever, and there's a certain order of things. There are trades. It is truly a fantasy draft with millions upon millions, if not more, dollars of implications, be it headline games within the Big Ten, non-conference games. Explain to people what a TV game draft is in 2025 in the Big Ten.
All right. The Big Ten has probably the most unique television media partner experience of any of the networks. Now you have the SEC and ACC mostly is locked in with ESPN, save for a couple of games on the CW for the ACC. The Big Ten has 3 major linear partners: Fox, which is priority number 1, and then kind of an equality relationship with CBS and NBC. Fox has leaned into its big noon kickoff, which has aggravated a lot of Ohio State and Penn State fans over, especially the last few years, but over time. CBS has moved its SEC on CBS midday to now the Big Ten, and then NBC has carved out its role as a primetime network for the Big Ten on Saturday nights. So the draft process includes those 3 entities plus BTN, which has scattered picks later in the draft. And what they do is they agree on a day. This year was April 30th. And they're all separate. They're not in one room. Man, I wish they were in one room. We would have.
That'd be so cool.
In Macau. Yeah.
I bet if you're, NBC, you could say, can we stream this on Peacock or, Fox? Can we put this on FS1?
Sure.
CBS Sports Network. I mean, BTN, this would have been great. But no, they're different campuses kind of scattered throughout. And it's kind of funny because Fox has there's 3 or 4 people in each one that are that are very much intimately involved in this process. But Foxes are on Zoom with each other, and then they handle the picks via email. So it just sounds it's almost like the old signing day, send it through the fax machine thing. It's like, we got all this technology and we're doing it through email. But they said, look, we used to do it on a conference call. That got really boring. So we decided let's do it this way. But still, Slack channels, at least with a Slack channel, you could see so-and-so is typing. So you're like, okay, here we go. But how it's kind of set up after that is that the league determines the draft order. And they place a number with every pick for every game going all the way to the end, which I think is, I want to say 123 or something to that effect, that were available. They already pull out the Friday night games, and those are in a different category. So they've already dispersed them. But then when they go from number 1, Fox as the primary rights holder has the first 3 picks. Then it goes and then the next 4 are NBC, CBS, and it depends on the year. Like last year, NBC was 5, CBS was 4, and NBC made a trade to get up to number 3. And so there's trades that are allowed. So it's kind of cool that way. And and then Fox has 8, and then it goes, 9, 10, and then Fox has 11. So they sit in their rooms, their war rooms. CBS was in the conference room. NBC was out in Connecticut at its Stanford complex, and then Fox was scattered. And then they start selecting. So with the first 3 picks, I know Ohio State, Michigan was number 1. Ohio State, Texas was 2. And I believe Ohio State, Penn State was 3 for Fox. They're all winners. Then 4 this year was NBC took Oregon, Penn State. And then CBS was a little more coy with who it picked.
Is that an alternating 4? Do CBS and NBC alternate by the year who gets that 4th pick? Okay.
Yeah, because like last year, it was CBS that had 4, and which caused NBC to jump up to 5 because it wanted it wanted Oregon, Ohio State,
right?
And so it felt like that CBS would grab them. So instead, they went ahead and jumped up there. CBS or Fox fell down to 5 and still got what it wanted, which was Ohio State, Penn State. So,
right.
And they already picked Michigan, Texas, and Ohio State, Michigan. So it's fascinating how that works. And then there's so much strategy involved that I can get into, but I'll kind of turn it over to you guys to see what questions you have about this.
Oh yeah, fair enough. So okay, let's go there. Strategically, obviously, people are going to easily understand why Fox would prioritize Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon. Take your pick of the huge schools that have played in huge games, that have huge followings, that are proven ratings. Clydesdales. Is a ratings Clydesdale a term in the TV industry? It should be.
I think it is now. I think it is now, Dan.
So strategically, you understand where that comes from. What's the second level of strategy? Is it just all merit-based, or is it week-based? Is it, you talked about in your column, like looking at what SEC and Big 12 and ACC games are, and like, even though this, USC Notre Dame game looks appealing, there's a good chance it's going to be up against, Alabama LSU or something. So from what you could decipher, what were the second tier strategies of the networks?
Okay, I'll start with let's go with NBC. They're kind of the easiest one to read here, and that is that NBC also has a contract with Notre Dame, and it's entering its 35th year in that. Treasures that one. It wants them both to be mutually beneficial and feed off one another.
Sure.
Now, the one thing that they're looking at is, okay, they got a contract where they could put 3 Notre Dame games in prime time. Which ones matter, and which ones do they feel will do the best there, and also on what weeks will they matter against the Big Ten? And say, the first one was the most obvious one, and that was Texas A&M at Notre Dame, because sure. That was a garbage game day for the Big Ten. There was nothing of value. They had 2 Big Ten games, and the only other game that was even a Power 5 matchup was Alabama, Wisconsin, and that was and then that goes to ESPN anyway. So they had their pick of nothing. So they said, this is easy. We got a marquee matchup, good weekend. We're going to take this and then deprioritize the Big Ten that week. And so they ended up moving, like they picked 2 games for Peacock as opposed to big NBC. And one of them was Ohio at Ohio State. So you get, you're going to get ratings no matter what, because it's Ohio State, but it's Ohio. So the strategy for them is, okay, which weeks are ratings gold for the Big Ten that we want to prioritize? Which ones are devalued with Notre Dame? So that all of this is strategy that they started looking at back in December. Okay, here's the Big Ten schedule. Here's Notre Dame's schedule. How does this all fit? And kind of make that work. And then and then a couple of times then they can move like a Big Ten game to the midday on NBC and feed into the Notre Dame game. But they also aren't going to make that the priority, say number 2 overall, when you can have a really good primetime game in another week or two. With Fox, it's a little different because they have baseball commitments.
Right.
And so that's what kept them from having Friday games in late October. Last year, I don't know if you recall, they opened the World Series on a Friday night, Yankees Dodgers, and it was in LA, so it's perfect for them. I mean, they couldn't gotten better because it's USC Rutgers right after that with like a 11 p.m. Eastern time kickoff, which was, when you think about it, just how horrible can you treat one of your teams to make them go all the way across the country and kick off at like 11 o'clock at night. But they did. That didn't happen this year. And 2 weeks were completely wiped out. But in the big picture, they all look at what other events are going on. How do we structure this around? The SEC is obviously one that they really weigh into. One weekend that NBC really was focused on was the 27th of September, which was the Oregon Penn State game. Now it's probably going to go against Alabama, Georgia. The time hasn't been set, but that's going to be a really, crazy competition as to who gets, what kind of viewership. But they wanted to build that as holistically as a big NBC weekend. They have the Ryder Cup, and they wanted the Ryder Cup to lead into that. And then on Sunday night, they have Dallas Green Bay NFL game.
Right.
So they figure, wow, we could really make this a big NBC weekend and build everything around it. So that was part of their strategy. And then the Big Ten stays out of it, but they kind of nudge some things around. And that was one where they thought, this might be a good one for NBC. We're not going to say Fox don't take it, but it'd be kind of cool if you left it for NBC on this one. There are some strategies though for Fox that are complicated because of the noon kickoff window. They can't have West Coast games there.
Right.
So they're stuck, and they get stuck from time to time. We saw that last year where there was a really bad weekend in early November where maybe the best game or the second best game went to Friday night that they had. I think it was Iowa UCLA, which tells you what kind of weekend it was. It wasn't real good. CBS had the number one pick, and NBC had a Notre Dame game. And there was like two other games on the West Coast. Oh, I know what it was. It was Penn State Washington. Penn State wanted this whiteout so badly that they were willing to go to Peacock for it at night, which prevented that. CBS had the first pick, and it was Michigan, Indiana. And then there was another West Coast game. So they for Big Noon, they had their choice of Rutgers, Minnesota, or Ohio State, Purdue. And they're like, well, we're going to go Ohio State because it's Ohio State. You can play scrimmage there and get better ratings than probably the other game. And then, when Ohio State fans got mad, it's like, well, what are we supposed to do here?
Right.
And so they're kind of hemmed in on some of this, but they do have, some strategic ideas. And then CBS is more about kind of looking across at the SEC. They know they're going to go up against a decent SEC game, but, they also want to, try to build around whatever they do on the weekend as well.
I mean, I'm getting such big fantasy draft vibes from this whole thing. I'm giggling like an idiot over here because it reminds me of drafts that I had back in like 2005. I can only imagine what that's like, waiting for the email to come in, trying to then plot what your next move is. Was there anything that surprised you? Like, I heard email as the primary medium for this. That surprised me. You reported the story. Are there any other items of note that surprised you?
Yeah, that part did too. I mean, because you think of all the ways, we're communicating, everybody else is communicating face to face, and you'd think that they'd have it, in some sort of fashion that way. It's like, no, we're going to go email. That was a little strange, but it's like, well, what are you going to text each other? I guess that'd probably be even easier. But they all kind of had their little funny moments talking about it. One was like, it's, there's no chimes that go out. There's no, here's the pick or anything like that. One of the things that I talked about, I didn't quite get in the story that I thought was really interesting. I said, were there ever any moments where you were like, yes, we got this game, or, oh man, we were waiting on that one.
Can't believe this fell to us. Yeah.
Yeah, we all do that in fantasy football. Every year you're like, oh, God, one pick, and they're like, yeah, absolutely. And they're like, our stomachs churning, we're sweating, and then it comes to us and we yell, and then we don't, if we don't get it, we're really frustrated visibly. And
was there a time limit, by the way, on the picks? Like, did they have to send an email within 20 minutes? There was nothing, no limit? No,
there's no countdown. There's no clock. I asked, I said,
insane.
So did anybody get busted like Minnesota did back in the, 10, 20 years ago?
Yeah, you should be forced to auto-draft Rutgers, Minnesota if the pick isn't in. Like drafting the wrong Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, right.
From the Bears? What?
Yeah. An all-time troll of a move.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask Scott, like to that end, did you hear anything of there being a particular game that was selected earlier than expected, a so-called reach? Because we all do that in fantasy football as well, right? There's a guy that you're kind of fixated on for whatever reason.
Amani Toomer.
Amani, like sometimes it defies logic. Were there any of those, or is this just like cold, hard numbers that are driving these decisions?
There wasn't anything like that, and here's why. Because once you get past the big games, they draft weekends.
Right.
So and that's where they actually do their best work, probably, because anybody can say, well, yeah, we want Texas and Ohio State, or we want Oregon, Penn State. I mean, that makes sense. You get a whiteout in Happy Valley, 2 teams play for the championship. That's going to sell like crazy. But then you start to get into some other weeks where we're looking at it, 3.5, 4 months in advance, and we're going, okay, who's, which games are going to stand out? Well, let's take like October 11th, for instance. And you've got, some really good games. Ohio State at Illinois, that could be, you could have 2 teams in the top 10 potentially if Illinois, comes to play, or if Illinois goes back to being Illinois before Bielema, they could be losing to Indiana and a couple other teams, and all of a sudden you're going, we don't want to draft them. Iowa, Wisconsin, maybe Wisconsin gets off the mat, maybe Iowa's good with Mark Gronowski, and all of a sudden that's it's a Camp Randall. Maybe we want this to be prime time or something. And then you're like, Michigan USC, is it the Michigan USC we saw last year, or is it the Michigan USC from 2 years ago? Indiana, Oregon, same thing. Is this, is IU, did they go and they beat Illinois and Iowa, or are they, just kind of fall back to the pack? And that's why you draft the weekends. And what one of the strategies that pretty much all of them have told me is like, it's not so much to be number 1, it's to make sure you're not number 3 on a bad weekend.
Right. Because
now all of those games are legitimate. There's probably 4 decent games, and then there's a couple others that might fit into that too, like a UCLA, Michigan State. Who knows? Maybe Nico is great and Aiden Childs is great, and that fits in there too. But you just don't want to all of a sudden go, oh man, we got stuck with a really bad game, and so kind of like what Fox did.
So I was gonna say, when you're saying when you draft a weekend, it's at a certain point they own the right to prioritize a matchup that weekend. When do they select? It's a 2-week window. When is the selection?
It's a 12-day and a 6-day.
Okay.
So they're every week is given that 12-day priority, but I believe it's twice per year that they can wait until 6 days,
Gotcha.
Which would be like the Sunday morning. And that's predicated on the results on that Saturday. You might get late in the year, there's a couple of games that really, kind of stand out, and you're thinking, do we want, like after the Ohio State Penn State result, what, maybe Ohio State's undefeated and you're like, I know they're playing Purdue, but that's still Ohio State. Or maybe Penn State pulls the upset and plays Indiana, and that's our number 1. You want to wait until that result takes place. So I did ask specifically though, what were the games that really caused you that moment or the anguish? And they said, we had them, but I'm not going to tell you which ones they were. So
of course not. That's gamesmanship, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Scott, with respect to the whole Big Noon thing, love it or hate it, Fox has clearly made a brand out of it. It is its own product now. Everybody who follows college football sort of knows what's going on in that world. What do the other network people think of it? Because as a fan, clearly we understand why it's frustrating. But from a network perspective, as we've come to know now these last 5 years or so, their view of the college football world tends to be a bit warped and through a different lens than the rest of us. Did you get any commentary on that front?
Yeah, I mean, from Fox, they loved it, and the reason why is it's fertile territory. We always kind of grew up, especially in Big Ten country. It's like, all right, you've got Beth Mowins and Pam Ward doing the ESPN2 game, or you've got it's Purdue Northwestern and but the kind of the Big Ten mindset all these years was noon is weak, 2:30 was the golden era, and then 3 or 4 or 5 times you get that primetime game and you're really excited about it. Well, everything's completely changed. I mean, all the windows are open. You've got FCS versus Big Ten teams in primetime. But when it comes to Big Noon in particular, Fox has leaned in on it because they felt like, especially 4 or 5 years ago, it's like, well, we're going to have to go against the best SEC game in the midday. They tried that. It didn't really work. Prime time is the same type of deal. You're going to go up against a great game there, but noon, people are just finishing up their game day show. And it's like, wow, here's a really good game to start your day. And it works. The ratings are high for it. One of the things that Mulvihill told me, Mike Mulvihill from Fox, was, look, you could take out the top 3 games we picked last year, and we still had a higher average Big Ten numbers than everybody else. And I'm like, okay, Ohio State, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan, Texas. You remove those 3 and they still have high numbers. So they're going to lean into it. They do respect, though, that some of the schools don't like it or don't like it that often.
Right.
And that's what we saw with the Texas-Ohio State situation that went down. That, opening weekend, Labor Day weekend, they figured, hey, that even though that Sunday night, I think, has Miami, Notre Dame, they wanted to move that into prime time on a Sunday night. And Ohio State was all for it. Special night, fertile territory. They don't have a game against anybody of value the next week. Then, but Texas, which was contractually right, said, no, we don't want to do that. And so then it got moved back to noon. But what they're trying to do is show that they are making efforts to help the schools out. And that's just going to be an ongoing process. And I think what the league did this year a little bit better job was of its kind of week by week is it's not leaving Ohio State out there hanging. I think there's some other games that they can plug in because as I said, that, if you had like one of the weeks, Iowa at Oregon, you couldn't have it at Big Noon, but if now you can, because it's in Iowa City, it's just kind of those differences.
You mentioned the Rutgers 11 p.m. local kickoff last year, which is insane to still think about. I had completely forgotten. I remember that there was a doubleheader, but the timing escaped me. Were there any other errors that networks were looking to correct? Were there lessons learned from previous drafts that they said, okay, I am never again going to prioritize this kind of game or this week or this scheduling strategy?
Yeah, the one that really crept up to them, that there were a few, but one that stood out immediately when they got feedback on was last year with Michigan State. Michigan State played on Peacock on a Saturday night at home against Ohio State, and then had to turn around that Friday and play Oregon on the road. And so you had a 6-day window against 2 of the top 2 or 3 teams in the country. And, and you have the other factors that they really don't throw in there, like brand new coach. But to expect a team to go out there and play that type of opponent, 6 days apart was really unfair. They felt, Michigan State expressed that, and then they looked back and said, okay. And then a few of the other things that they're working on as they go as best that they can is, while Ohio State had its last 6 games appear on noon, 5 of which on Big Noon, Michigan State, I think, had 5 night games. Iowa had 4 or 5 night games, and
right,
3 of which I think in November. So you had a kind of a skewed view. So they're trying to figure out how to not have so many night games from one team and maybe be able to push Ohio State into prime time a little bit more often. So those were some of the takeaways that they had from their scheduling. And, but there are some things they just can't get away from, which is the travel component. Now that you're on the West Coast, it's gonna be difficult. they've tried to adjust it. And this is the second year of a 14-week season. And so next year they're going to have to redo this. But where the West Coast teams, they don't play 2 road games if they go east. They'll go, USC goes to Illinois, then a couple weeks, then they go home and they either have a bye or they have a home game, something like that, as opposed to, okay, you're going to Illinois, you fly back, and then you're going to Rutgers or something like that. That just, but it's difficult, to do that with this kind of inventory.
Scott, do you think that by giving this whole process a little bit more visibility, you have inadvertently turned it into more of a production?
I was just looking for something interesting to write this time of year.
This is not uncommon. Yeah. This is not uncommon when somebody sheds a little light on anything, really, especially something that I think has roots in the fantasy draft culture that we all know and love from, current or previous lives. It would not be out of the realm of possibilities that next year or at some point in the future, this becomes more of a talking point, more of a production, more of a thing that college football fans can watch and cheer on and, set their watch by.
Oh, I'm sure that we're going to get a few people who will ask me, when is the draft? When's it going to be held? And it varies by the year. It's not it was like the Wednesday after the NFL draft this year. And sometimes it's a little earlier, sometimes it's a little later, but I'm sure, next spring, that's going to be a topic. Everybody, when is it going to be held? When are they going to do it? And then afterwards, am I going to try to get intel? Like it was one of those old fashioned basketball secret scrimmages where you're calling the assistant coaches. So who did what? And
you could be the Mel Kiper of this.
I could be, I need, my hair is disappearing in the back, so I need some slickness to it. But
I mean, the only problem with that is, of course, people look at TV as ruining the sport. And so then we're going to highlight TV networks who people hold accountable for changes in the sport and all being driven by TV money and sort of making celebrities out of them. Like we're hosting a egg price raising TV show. Obviously I would watch that, but no, it's sort of an interesting, part of the sport, of course. I wonder with the draft, with you mentioning the schedule changes and the feedback that the conference got and the network got, I wonder where this is going with regard to networks and getting games. And one of the byproducts of the TV deal is we're getting CBS games, network television games, or NBC primetime games that never would have existed because it was a 3-6 team against a 4-5 team, and it would have been relegated to the Big Ten network. But these are the slots that, NBC and CBS have. Are they a little bit upset about putting an uninspiring matchup on prime time airwaves? Is there any sort of buyer's remorse about either NBC and CBS and their place in the Big Ten TV deal? Or are they just thrilled to have live football because it'll do enough of a rating that even though on the face having, 2 non-bowl teams play again on primetime network TV seems weird, but, is it still a win?
Ultimately, it's a win for them because the ratings are still pretty good. They're not, the SEC is shown to have more depth, and I don't know if that's just team names that work better. The fact that they don't beat each other up as much and, have one less league game, but overall, I think we've seen it, especially not so much last year, but the year before. There were some primetime games. You're like, the NBC,
right?
But now that they have 18 teams, it kind of gets spread out. And I think last year was somewhat unique in that Michigan was really slow out of the gate and lost a couple of games early. USC never really got off the mat. And then we didn't know how good Indiana and Illinois were until the season was really progressing. So, now kind of going into this season, we think Illinois could be a top 15 team. It should be a top 15 team anyway, coming out of the gate. Right. And then maybe they're going to be good. Indiana, can they repeat it? Can Iowa finally put together an offense? And then you got your blue bloods and teams like Oregon that you feel like they could be something, special again. So they do have better inventory. But what I can say about the non-conference schedule is that absolutely has to change, or they have to change the schedule to accommodate the networks, because they did have to provide an exemption to Fox in week 2 because there was nothing there at all. All the Big Ten's road games were, or all the Big Ten's major games were on the road. And so they only had two games that they controlled pitting power conference teams that Saturday. One was Boston College at Michigan State, which is a nice game. Maybe one team goes to a bowl game. Yeah. But that goes to NBC. So that kind of vaults to the top. And then the other one is Oklahoma State at Oregon, which when it was made looked like a great game. Oklahoma State obviously went 0-9 in the Big 12 last year. So that changes things, but there was nothing left for Fox. They were strongly considering opening up with, at least because Ohio State's playing Grambling. You can't really go there. And then Michigan's at Oklahoma. So then you're going, Penn State's at home. They're playing FIU. What are we doing here? So they got an exemption because they decided, they still have a Big 12 contract. And Iowa plays Iowa State. And that's a day that Kirk Ferentz can pass Woody Hayes as the winningest coach in Big Ten history. It's it's a Big Ten team at a Big 12 team, a rivalry game. It's, they could do big noon kickoff. So instead of playing it at 4, which is what the plan was, they said, we just moved this into our noon time slot. And then they ended up saying okay and did that. But in the future, the Big Ten's going to have to start going to these teams, and because what's funny to me is that 13 out of the 18 actually play 10 Power 5 opponents. So they've actually got decent non-conference schedules for that part, but they've got to do something about the scheduling itself. They can't just have these free weekends when you have 3 linear partners. It's one thing if you're the SEC and you can put it on ESPN2 when you're playing Memphis and Ole Miss or something like that, but you can't put NBC, Akron at Nebraska. It's just not going to work.
For your consideration on any podcast player, search Solid Verbal, find us, and hit follow or subscribe. It's just that easy. Were there any, I don't know how to describe this, draft crushes? Obviously, there are the games early that people are selecting, not early necessarily, but the picks are early, that involve, the big headline ratings Clydesdale teams. Is it apparent that any of these networks are sort of buying low or think bigger things about a specific team, like a CBS, very bullish on Nebraska? Or is Fox, was there any sort of apparent, hey, this team might not be super attractive right now, but we think they could have a special season and we might be getting a big value play by circling our wagons around this team?
I think when you go to week 4, that they've got that kind of setup right now. And that's with CBS going with deciding already to announce it, Michigan at Nebraska in the midday. I think they're playing that one of those two teams, the winner of those two teams, is going to make a play. And Michigan, of course, is a ratings Goliath. Nebraska is also pretty good despite its, lack of success over the recent years. So I think they're figuring great atmosphere at Nebraska, as it always is. Michigan, 2 named programs. Winner is going to get a bump. They're going to be ranked. They're probably, and I think both teams could be ranked even if Michigan loses at Oklahoma. And so I think that's where they really kind of drew the line, because there's also some pretty good games too that are available. CBS also took, as part of its Pac-2 coverage, Washington State, so it leads into the Apple Cup. But then under Big Ten control, you've got Illinois and Indiana, which I think is going to be a fantastic game, and Oregon at Oregon State. I mean, it may not be very good, but it's still a rivalry game, the Civil War, and Michigan State at USC. I think that's also intriguing to me. So, but by announcing that game early, I think it really signifies that they are they're all in on the winner going forward, and they play it all the way out, where they picked Nebraska, Iowa on Black Friday as well.
Scott, how many people are involved in an operation such as this? Because as we're talking this through, I'm thinking of what we go through when we're trying to preview teams in advance of a season. I'm sure everybody kind of in our world does something similar. It's hard. There's a million data points that you have to try and consider just when figuring out which teams do we like, which players do we like, which storylines are worth following and mentioning to the audience. But then you have to layer on top of it the added math of this team brings in X million of an audience each time they play. Like there's that whole other, like, I don't know, quantitative level of this with respect to TV that you have to try and factor in as well. Like, were there different approaches to preparation to putting together those big boards? What did it look like from that standpoint?
Each of the networks have about 3 people in their war rooms, and they're the head of programming for sports. I talked to each one of them who really made the final call, and then a couple other people who really handled that sport specifically are intimately involved, and they go through war games starting in December when the Big Ten announced its schedule.
This is great.
It's pretty cool that they like NBC told me, look, we split our teams up, and then we had other people with those teams, and it's like, you go in this room today, you're Fox, you go in this room today, you're CBS, and we're going to be NBC, and we're going to try to figure out what their ideas and their strategies are. And then you look around, okay, well, they've got the World Series this week, so they're not going to think about something here, or well, they've got Notre Dame at night, so we're going to focus on a really big game earlier in the day. So they're trying to kind of figure all that out, and then they go through multiple mock drafts. They said that almost weekly, and then it comes down to almost daily as they get closer, because they just want to figure out how it plays out. So ultimately, they don't get surprised. That's what they really want. So it really sounds like Mulvihill's like, I've never been inside an NFL war room, but it kind of feels like it, because they just play this scenario out so much, and then they get their selections, and it's kind of funny. I mean, it's kind of like with the NFL draft, when you play a mock draft and you're like, that's not that hard, we can just pick this thing here. But when you're talking about the difference between, looking at the tangible numbers, not just wins and losses and how good this team is, but also TV numbers. And then the thing that they all kind of expressed that's been the most challenging for them is now with the portal, that they're trying to follow the moves and who's adding, who's going where, what does this team look like? Because if you're talking about 10 years ago and Ohio State lost all of its players, 15 to the NFL and draft picks and everything else, you might say, yeah, they're due for a down year. No, they reloaded. They've already got a lot of talent, but they reloaded. And they're looking at each and every team like, wow, can Mark Gronowski really take this team from, offensively being challenged in Iowa City to maybe, hey, they're playing Oregon, they're playing Indiana, they're playing Penn State all at home. Maybe that's something we want to eye on. Is this something we think can happen? And then they're reading everybody's, reporting and whatever. So they're analyzing this so deeply that, it actually kind of came off as a surprise, because you'd think that they cared and it mattered, but man, they go all in on this.
Are there any risks? And this sounds silly, I grant you. Are there any risks of corporate espionage? Which, by the way, I haven't not heard. Like, there are whispers that, the sort of subtext of all of this is all happening in a broader Disney, Fox, like, shadow battle, right? With the Big Ten and the SEC. One, I think there's currently a Disney YouTube TV lawsuit over an executive leaving Disney for YouTube TV. And then there's proprietary, non-disclosure, non-compete types of things going on. Have there ever been, maybe you don't know the answer to this question, that's fine, this is just me asking, poaching potential of Fox trying to take an NBC person or vice versa, because all of a sudden now you don't need a scout team running, backup quarterback as Cordell Stewart. You actually have somebody who understands the Fox mindset or the NBC mindset. Has that been a part of this at all behind the scenes?
There haven't been any moves. I did ask a little bit, kind of not quite espionage term, but about some of the strategies and whether they, do you guys afterwards you get together and you know, over drinks and you
Right.
go, "Hi, man, I can't believe you took this."
Mhm,
There hasn't been there. They're like, you know, we're all colleagues, we're all friends, we all get along, but you know, we're also competitors, and we also have our own little thoughts that we don't want to share. So
Right.
they don't quite rehash the draft necessarily. Maybe they will a pick or two here and there, but nothing as far as I would say is espionage. But I can see where it could happen.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at you know, for instance, you let like a Notre Dame game at night, and then you somehow find a way, if you're Notre Dame, hey, we're going to use a high pick on that week, so we're going to leave everybody screwed. You know,
Right.
we're going to have the best you know, pick that week leading into the Notre Dame game. You're like, dude, what are you doing? You know, you're not even having your Big Ten game in prime time, or you're going to move it to Peacock or something like that. That, you know, there are opportunities for it for sure, and I hope I find out about them if it really did happen.
Oh man, I can't wait. That would be an incredible story, and I would imagine there are very few people who are going to have the sources and access more so than you. My final question is about the story you wrote today, which I definitely ties into everything we've spoken about before, but you mentioned Jim Delaney's stance as it relates to scheduling, as it relates to positioning teams to look good in the eyes of the College Football Playoff Committee, selection committee, and the reported Tony Petitti pitch for 4 auto bids for the Big Ten, as opposed to the 5+11 model, which I think has sort of come out after those 4+4 plus 2+2 plus, I can't do all the math in my head this quickly on the fly, but getting to 16 teams, and that it may, the auto bid element may have cost the Big Ten, which is also something that the SEC has talked about. And, you know, we have Greg Sankey going up on his pulpit talking about, you know, the analytics favor the SEC's road more so than anybody else's via strength of schedule. Where is the Big Ten today in terms of its preferences, how it is approaching its strategy for pitching, you know, the future of the college football playoff? Where does that stand, and where do you expect them to land, the Big Ten, in terms of preferences?
First of all, the Big Ten needs to start talking.
Yeah.
This has been going on for too long, and Tony Petitti likes working behind the scenes. He doesn't really like being out there vocal, whereas Greg Sankey has no problem with it. But you know, they're taking up all the oxygen, and they've changed the narrative. The SEC and the Big Ten, a couple of months ago, I was in New Orleans when they had their Divide the World Summit Part 2, and it was like they were they were in lockstep in a lot of areas, and now it just seems like the SEC is kind of back to this being having its swagger out there, and this is why we think it should be. And
Right.
the Big Ten is kind of taking a step back from the forefront and kind of ceded that ground. And then you have the ACC and Big 12 saying, well, yeah, it should be 5+2, 11. That's the fairest way to do it. Well, I would say that the Big Ten, the reason why it's not wholeheartedly embracing this, and actually I put the numbers between what it would be if with the current constitution, because it's kind of hard to go back and forth, but the current team constitution over the last 4 years, one versus the other, and the strategy is that they have a lot of PTSD from what happened 10 years ago. And this was, they would have, first of all, they would have gotten more teams in a 5+11 than they would have at the guarantees that they're asking for. But the other part is, in 2015, Jim Delaney decided, since we're in a playoff era, we're going to position our teams in the best possible way to be competitive, to not only make the playoff, but also make New Year's Six bowls, which were, a little bit more important than they are today. Right. I mean, from that perspective. And so he unveiled this, what he called 1910, numerical acronym, that they're playing 1 championship game, 9 Big Ten games, because they were at 8, 1 intersectional opponent, or which would be just a non-power conference team, and then no FCS opponents. He figured that would provide them with the strength of schedule to put them in the conversation every year for not only the playoff, but then also for major bowl games. And a couple years in, it got proven that just didn't matter. And one of it was when Ohio State twice got left out as champions. And what they were looking at wasn't so much, Ohio State lost one game in the Big Ten each of that 17 and 18 years. One was at Iowa, one was at Purdue. Both were blowouts, both were surprising, but they're also looking at it. Look, if we were to 8 games and we're divisions, maybe we're not even playing that game.
Right.
Maybe they're playing Grambling, or they're playing Morgan State, or they're playing, Mercer or whatever. And so that game wouldn't have happened, and we would have been better off not playing 9 as opposed to playing 9. And whereas other leagues, meaning the SEC primarily, but also the ACC, you're not having that opportunity where half your teams lose. And also in the month of November, there are those non-conference games against group of 5 teams or FCS opponents where when you're in the middle of the season, sometimes you run out of gas, you're on the road at a conference team, and you get a hit with a buzzsaw. And so they were really frustrated through that. And then the one that really sent them over the top was in 2018. And this is about a bowl game, nevertheless. Penn State getting ranked 12th. Florida was 10th. LSU was 11th. LSU's layout was fine. Florida had 2 FCS opponents. They played a 3-9 Georgia, or 3-9 Colorado State, and then Florida State, which had a below 500 record, and really did not have a very good schedule, but it did beat LSU. And whereas Penn State played Pitt, which was a Coastal Division champion, played an 11-2 Appalachian State, played some really good top 5 competition, and yet it was still ranked behind Florida. So Delaney's like, well, what do we do now? How do we get this now? Is it all eye test? If it is all eye test, then these are really uneven, and now he's, of course, 2 commissioners removed from the Big Ten, but now they look at it as, we don't want to get into a situation where our 9-game league schedule is a detriment when you're comparing to an 8-league schedule. So that's why we want guarantees. We're different. We're built differently.
Right.
We want it. We have 9 games. They have 8. We feel like we're going to be competitive. And the numbers show that they would have still gotten the same or similar numbers. In fact, they would have had fewer numbers in the auto bid era than they would have if it was just 5 plus 12. But we feel like this is a better way for us to guarantee it. Now, if the SEC goes, okay, we're going to go to 9 games, and then the Big Ten will probably come down, whether it's 5 plus 11 or there's a little bit different guarantee setup, they would come down from that. But if the SEC doesn't go to 9 games, then it won't budge on the game.
By the way, Greg Sankey did mention that those 2 FCS opponents that Florida played, the analytics couldn't measure heart, couldn't measure grit. And so Greg Sankey coincidentally did not mention that in his strength of schedule tirade. It wasn't a tirade, but his presentation.
Yeah.
Scott Dochterman, we've taken up enough of your time. Thank you so much. Everybody read, everybody follow Scott at The Athletic. He's writing terrific stuff about national college football, Big Ten football, you name it. I can't wait to see where the draft goes next season. Part of me hopes it's an entertainment spectacle with Fox bringing like the guy who does the voice of Homer Simpson to announce their picks in the way that like the NBA lottery bring like good luck charms. And part of me is horrified by this whole ordeal. So Scott, thank you very much for your time, and everybody check him out.
All right, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So look, I don't know how interesting that was to people listening at home.
I think it was. I think it definitely was.
I don't know. I can't speak for the Verballerhood.
Yeah.
I've been on the edge of my chair for the last 45 minutes. I swallowed that interview whole. I loved every second of it. Just the vision, the idea of there being a draft of these games, that there are network dorks scattered about the country via email, which I cannot stress enough. You need the patience of a dead horse to do an 8-hour email draft. I have done it. It sucks.
It's terrible.
But it's something so nerdy and yet of such critical importance to these networks to be staging a draft. I want to broadcast it next year. Can they? You
want to buy the rights?
We're the biggest independent college football show out there.
Yeah.
Can we get the rights to this with not a real rooting interest to put it up on the YouTube channel. We can get like our own media consultant, whoever, to break down the numbers. And I want to broadcast this thing.
I want the Excel championships, and I'm bringing back Jason Benetti to call it. I want the Big Ten TV draft. I want things that ESPN the Ocho wouldn't even consider.
Yes.
Wouldn't even consider airing. I want what's on. Is there like a quilting championships? I know there's a quilting reality show on Netflix.
There's a championship for everything.
I want the what's it called? The cast iron cleaning championships. There has to be something like that, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Cast iron restoration championships.
Great.
I want it all, Ty. I want it all. But yes, I think it was fascinating. Absolutely. You know, this is the gears and pulleys behind the scenes of how we consume this sport. So it is relevant. It is interesting to me. You know, you mentioned the fantasy draft of it all, and it is. What I was also picking up vibe-wise was, are you a Sudoku guy?
I wouldn't say I'm a Sudoku guy.
But like if you're on a plane and extremely bored and, you know, one of your iPad dies or something like that, and you're like, all right, I don't even know if planes have the magazine. I don't know if American Way or whatever exists anymore. But there was something, the mechanics and strategy of like, okay, a 3 can't be here or here, but a 3 can go in this square. A 7 can't go here. Like the piecing of that kind of strategic puzzle of like, well, we can't air because we got the World Series, we've got the Ryder Cup, we've got the whatever event, we've got this game already circled here, so we can't do this team here, or we can't air this then. Like, there is that, like, moving around the 9s and 8s and 3s and 2s, and, you know, right, like, there was that strategy element is what I was picking up from him as well. So it's all fascinating the way, and, you know, the people involved would obviously say something like, it's not as interesting as you think.
I'm sure it isn't. There's no way it can be, especially if it's conducted via email. There's a lot of sitting around. Scott talked about it in his piece. There's a lot of sitting around. I'm sure there's a lot of donuts. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's a lot of small talk waiting for the email ding. But at the same time, in our little world that we've constructed here as college football fans, it kind of starts there. The season kind of starts there. All too often, when a game is played, on what network it's played, who is calling the game, all of these things factor into the fan experience.
It's also interesting because while, you know, I sort of half joked about corporate espionage and hiring away some, you know, programming person from CBS going to Fox and vice versa, they're all kind of on the same team here because NBC's eggs are all in Big Ten and Notre Dame. CBS's eggs are from a major conference level, I believe, all on the Big Ten now, right? Without their SEC deal. I don't believe they're calling ACC or Big Ten games. I know they have G5 conferences on CBS Sports Network, but and other CBS games as well on main CBS. But in terms of the major conference presence, it's Big Ten, and obviously Fox has Big 12, but its bread is buttered by the Big Ten, and their investment is by far the largest into the Big Ten than any other conference. They're all kind of pulling in the same direction, right? A healthy, robust, ratings monster Big Ten is good for everybody in these meetings. So it's not like they're really sworn enemies, whereas when this draft was happening, when ESPN was a Big Ten partner, and ESPN has had its toes in the Big Ten, in the Pac-10, 12, in the ACC, in the Big 12, right? That's when I think it might have even been more cutthroat, that I think battle lines were more obvious when there was the ESPN ABC element to this all. Yeah. Whereas like CBS just like had its big SEC game, right? There were rules involved with who they could pick and not pick. And, you know, a team couldn't be in that spot more than a certain number of times, the 330 spot. But like they were sort of set there. NBC had their Notre Dame, and Fox and ESPN were the ones sort of playing was risk. That's the global battle for domination. I would imagine it was maybe more cutthroat than in the draft, and now it's just more of a shadow battle. I'm serious.
I love it. Oh, I love this so much.
It's good.
I love this.
Yeah.
I want to do this episode every year with Scott. Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, look, thank you to one and all for downloading, for listening, for supporting. Again, footballers.com is a Patreon if you want to further support what we do. Big thanks to Scott. Gave us like an hour of his time here to do this and talk through not just the game draft, but also the backstory with the Big Ten and the 4 automatic bids. We're, of course, going to have to see where all of that comes down they've got until December the 1st to figure it out. It's not the last
Yeah.
we've heard of it, but clearly the Big Ten and SEC are going to be kicking up some dust on this front throughout the summer and as we get deeper into the year. So we'll cover that as best we can here on the show. Again, if you made it this far, hit follow, hit subscribe. If nothing more, we do appreciate your support. It helps us immensely, Dan. All right. We've got more episodes to record today, actually, as we kind of plan for the weeks that are ahead. So
Yes.
we'll get to doing that. We would encourage you, again, reach out on social media or via email, solidverbal@gmail.com, if you have anything further to say or add or any thoughts to get off your chest. We've been getting a lot of them over the last couple weeks here. People talking about the playoff format, talking about some of the previews that we've done, their expectations for teams and the like. So keep them coming. We can't respond to all of them, but we do read all of them and appreciate your feedback. We're getting a little bit closer, man. Getting a little bit closer. It's June now.
Yeah.
Season.
I mean, I still need to find out who Quentin Nelson's booking representative is. Let's not get it twisted. June is June, but it's still feeling good.
For that guy over there, my good friend, Dan Rubenstein, for our guest of honor today, Scott Dochterman of The Athletic. Go and check him out. We will talk to you all next week. In the meantime, stay solid.
Peace.